Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, you know, I'm here inside my trailer, and there's something big and hairy outside. I can see him through the window, and he's shaking the trailer. Oh my God, he's going to turn it over. He's huge and smelly, and it looks like a giant ape. Maybe this is one of these Bigfoot creatures. I did find a nest out back, and I found some footprints in the soft soil. So I think maybe I don't know how to capture one of these, or even if I should, perhaps we'll ask our guest tonight. Wouldn't you say, Tim? Maybe I should ask the guest.
You got to catch him if you have the opportunity. It's really special when you can actually capture one.
Well, I don't know. They're really huge, and I don't know whether they're deadly or not. Do you think they're deadly?
Occasionally, they're known to rip people's arms off and beat them with their own fists. So I would say probably a little.
Oh boy. So Tim, why don't you tell us who our guests are this evening before I get my arms ripped off? I guess Bigfoot got him. I have to beat the clock. Well, I know we have Peter Bernard, who's actually a friend of mine, an associate. When you go to YouTube and you check on our videos and look at the very fancy animation that's been done, Peter is responsible for that because he is one of the best, I would say, animators or cartoonists. I want to find out exactly what he identifies himself as. Because he what do you identify yourself as?
As a writer, but it's a
writer. Well,
my animation is not as good as the animation in Seth's movies. I love the creepy animation in Seth's movies, but you haven't introduced him yet. Sorry.
No idea. and if we don't find Tim in a while, what the heck? Anyway, we also have Seth with us this evening, who is a movie maker, and he's made, I don't know, how many films have you made up to date, Seth?
I'm editing a film about the Flatwoods Monster, which will be our 6th. But
that's one of my favorite classic UFO stories. Tim, are you there? Well, he's still not there.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Well, now we can. Why don't you officially tell us who we have on this evening?
Well, I think I had Bigfoot pull my internet cable there.
You might have to use the telephone like a lot of other guests do. Okay. Anyway, Seth, why don't you give us a little bit of your background?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, my name's Seth Breedlove, and I'm a film director, occasional writer, and I've been doing a series called Small Town Monsters for about 3 years now. We made a movie called Minerva Monster and Beast of Whitehall, another one called Boggy Creek Monster, which we discussed with you guys actually on the show. And this year we've released the Mothman in Point Pleasant back in June, and we are releasing Invasion on Chestnut Ridge next weekend. And mostly they are small town monster stories located in like rural communities that focus on the impact of the legends on the surrounding area. And but my background is not necessarily film. My background is actually newspaper journalism and writing more so than filmmaking. I've only been doing this for about 3 years now, and I'm all entirely self-taught at this point.
Well, just like I used to do with Tim, we did a series of horror movies, and Tim had more experience than I did, but we were pretty self-taught. and they still came out pretty great. I don't know. They're still up there and making the rounds. How did you pick the subject matter?
The whole thing started out as a book proposal called Small Town Monsters, and I picked these particular stories because they were ones that I had kind of learned about myself when I was first getting into like Bigfoot and the paranormal. And I believe I did have the Mothman story and the Flatwood story in my book proposal because those are stories that I've always kind of loved, especially Mothman. I don't think at the time I was very aware of Flatwoods, or at least not as aware of it as I am today. But the Mothman story has always been a big influence on me because the Mothman Prophecies film is one of the things that kind of got me into all this stuff. And so, yeah, I picked the subject matter just because I love the bizarre, and I haven't been super into this in a major way for all that long, maybe about 12, 15 years, somewhere in there. But I just love the idea of the unexplained.
Now, Flatwoods. Now that's one of my favorite small town monsters. I was fairly good friends with the late publisher Gray Barker. In fact, he published my first 3 books, and that was the incident down in Braxton County, West Virginia, that propelled him into the field. What did you? It took place in 1953.
1952. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about Flatwoods?
The Flatwoods monster was basically on this September night in 1952. These kids were playing on a football field at the base of this large hill in the town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's also very close to the dead center, geographical center of the state of West Virginia, but that's neither here nor there. They were playing football. They see this strange sort of fireball streak across the sky. And as kids do, they decided they wanted to go investigate it. So they wandered up to the top of the hill along the way, picking up 2 additional members of their group, one of their mothers and a family friend, an older boy named Gene. And they all head up to the top of this hill, and when they get up to the top of the hill, they notice this strange sort of mist hovering in the air. They smell a horrific odor, and they walk a little further, and somewhere around that time, they notice this large. I hesitate to call it a creature because that's not necessarily what they describe seeing, but this large metallic something.
Some people have said that it was maybe a form of rocket ship, and not so much of a physical being. Did they see a thruster on the bottom? I mean, did they see it take off, or?
No, when it comes to the actual events, all they really remember is it hovering toward them, like it was just hovering above the ground, and then it came toward them. They definitely recall it more as a rocket. In fact, we just interviewed both of the May boys. Well, they're not boys now, obviously, but we interviewed both of the Mays, and they recalled that what they described was basically like a V2 rocket with 2 portholes near the top where you could see light emanating from out of it. And we managed to interview Fred May and Ed May. Ed has never actually told his story or his version of the story on camera before. So that was pretty cool to actually get to talk to them about it. But yeah, basically they see this floating V2 rocket come at them, and they tear off down the hill. And honestly, the story kind of ends there for most people. That's kind of the common legend that people know about. But there's some additional elements to the story that are kind of fascinating, and we'll probably explore some of that stuff in the movie.
Now, are there more than the 2 witnesses that are still living?
There is another witness by the last name of Shaver who's still around, but unfortunately I haven't been able to track him down. He actually is somewhere here in Ohio. I just haven't been able turn him up. But other than those three, I'm not aware of any that are still living. This is 1952, and a lot of those guys have gone on. But
now who was the woman, the elderly woman?
That would actually be Fred and Ed May's mother, Kathleen, and she was there as well with them that night. And she passed away, and I want to say it wasn't that long ago. I want to say about a decade ago, maybe. But it's not, unfortunately, we'll probably not be able to hear from her in the movie unless I can turn up some audio taped interviews, which is actually a possibility. So,
well, now, wasn't there a TV show that they were on back in the 1950s, which sort of distorted the description of what the creature looked like, I think, and I do think they did. They obviously had audio with that.
Yeah, basically they were on a TV show called We the People, which was actually a live recording of a radio show called We the People, but it was on NBC. They were on the show, I want to say 2 or 3 days after the initial sighting, and the editor from the Braxton County Democrat, or the Braxton Democrat, went with them, and he's actually the one, or someone at the paper is the one that drew the illustration of the Flatwoods Monster that kind of everyone connects to what the Flatwoods Monster looks like, but it's not really what they described. He drew a facsimile of what they were claiming to see, but it was much more, trumped up than what they actually claimed to have seen. So they went on the show, and after that, it kind of became a viral story and became very popular. In fact, I mean, I've done some newspaper archival research on the story, and there are newspaper articles from around the country, because it must have hit the AP Wire, about that story that ran everywhere.
Well, I know Fate magazine published an article by, I think it was Ivan T. Sanderson, about the Flatwoods Monster. And then Gray Barker, that was the, if I can remember correctly, the first chapter or two in his book on the Men in Black. They knew too much about flying saucers. So the case got to be fairly well established. And I guess there were some people who thought that the group had some experience, and others, just like you would find today in a close encounter, thought that the whole thing was pretty much nonsense. But it's now you heard the two boys who are now grown tell their story. Does it differ any from what they told when they were young?
No, not really. It differs rather drastically from what the story has become today. Like most of these stories, at some point they pass over into legend, and from legend they almost become this sort of folktale and get trumped up even more. And that's what we're finding with this story, is that a lot of the details that people have recounted over the years don't seem to have any basis in fact. For instance, the dog that was with them that night supposedly inhaled this mist and fell dead. That never happened. The dog was with them that night, but the dog lived another 12 years after that incident took place. So the dog was fine following the incident. And in fact, they don't even recall anyone inhaling any of the mist and getting ill, which is commonly cited as a part of that story, is that one of the boys got horrifically ill and vomited and stuff like that after they inhaled the mist. But that all seems to be kind of made up or just kind of dramatized over the years.
No, I had heard that it was the dog that got sick afterwards. He didn't pass away, but he like puked his guts out afterwards.
Yeah, I guess we could say old yellow turned yellow.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, they said the dog was fine. They all ran back down the hill, and no one was ill. What's fascinating to me is the interview. We have an audio tape or an audio interview with Ivan Sanderson that was actually taken not long after he had gone and investigated the case, and he talks about some of these aspects of the story that I haven't heard really talked about elsewhere. Like after the fireball was seen streaking across the sky, it was seen landing on top of the hill. That's why they went up to that hilltop. And when they got up there, they did see an object in the field, like a UFO. But whatever happened to the UFO after they came running down off the hill, I haven't seen that part of the story talked about in many places. But Ivan talks about a neighbor that actually lived near there seeing the ship actually take off again. So, or actually, what happened is he actually recounted seeing the creature get in the ship and then the ship just kind of blink out, which I think is kind of a fascinating aspect of the story.
Well, now I remember hearing that that evening that there were multiple UFO sightings, not only in that area, but I guess other places, say like along the East Coast and places like that. I mean, have you looked into that aspect of the story yet?
Yeah. Supposedly there were, I think, 6 or 7 other objects seen around that same time in the skies, and they're commonly connected one to another, obviously, because they were all seen up and down the eastern seaboard that night. I haven't done a lot of digging into that aspect of the story because our film's going to focus mostly on what took place directly in Flatwoods around that time. What I did manage to turn up that's kind of a cool aspect of our film is the work of an author who went by the pen name of Paul Sagan. And Paul wrote a book called Alien Flatwoods Monster that was published after his death in 2008. And Paul was doing research into the Flatwoods Monster before anyone was even really, other than guys like Gray Barker and Ivan Sanderson. He was doing research into this in that interim period where it had kind of been forgotten about and where it kind of came back into the public eye. And the work that he did is really fascinating because he interviewed the Air Force colonel or captain that actually investigated the crash site that night. I believe his last name was Dunleavy, something like that. I cannot recall right now, but I like to try to point people toward that book because it exists, and apparently a lot of people don't know about it. The first 2 or 3 chapters are entirely about the Flatwoods Monster and kind of based off the research that Paul had done into the case. And the reason Paul got involved in the case to begin with was he was actually driving through Flatwoods the night that all of this took place with his family. And in fact, their car broke down right at the base of the hill where the creature was later seen, the monster was later seen. And he recalls it in the book, actually smelling a very unusual odor where they were parked at the base of the hill that night. So, and I don't know if you guys are aware of his work, but I like to try to point people toward his book because it seems like people are not aware of the work that Paul had done.
Well, along those lines, had there been any previous activity in that area, not only UFOs, but other kinds of paranormal stuff, ghosts, Bigfoot, what have you? Maybe a history going back as long as there've been people living in that area.
So yeah, and that's one of the things that connects this film to the other 2 that came before it. The Flatwoods film is the final film in the Appalachian Monster trilogy, which started with Mothman of Point Pleasant, went to Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, and will end with Flatwoods. And like in the case of Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, which comes out next week, you kind of find out that there was this long history of unusual happenings in the area around Flatwoods. We interviewed a witness, or not a witness, but the granddaughter of a lady who actually claims to have seen the Flatwoods Monster 2 weeks prior to the September 12th incident that everyone knows about. And she went on to tell us about some of the history of paranormal and unusual things happening in the hills, especially around the town of Flatwoods. And there is a long history of particularly UFO sightings during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was so common in that area that a lot of the people, the farmers and stuff, just didn't even acknowledge it after a certain point because it happened so commonly. And she told us some stories about her parents or her grandparents seeing this like teardrop shaped object fall from the sky. And one night they heard a strange sound behind their house, and they went out and fired a shot in the air, and a UFO rose from behind some trees. And it does seem like there's a long history of bizarre happenings in that area. And then we also have what became the Flatwoods Monster in the 60s and 70s, which was not the Flatwoods Monster that we're talking about right now. In the 60s and 70s, there were sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature around the area, and for whatever reason, they also added that name Flatwoods Monster to that creature. So it's also kind of strange because there's two Flatwoods Monsters,
and one is big and hairy, and the other one isn't.
Right.
Tall and metallic.
Now, this, you mentioned this horrendous odor. This odor is often associated with UFOs and occult phenomena. Sure,
and even with Bigfoot sightings as well, with like in the case of the Minerva Monster, which was one of our first films. They were constantly talking about the sulfur-like smell. Mm-hmm. That seems to be similar to what people smelled in connection with the Flatwoods Monster case, although the newspapers said it was a monster that had terrible BO.
Well, we can take care of that next time around. Anyway, I guess we're coming up here on a break, Tim, in a minute or so. And then when we come back, you will formally introduce Peter Bernard.
And it'll be my great pleasure to do that.
Yeah, because we somehow we got cut off by the evil emperor there.
The Bigfoot of the internet.
I guess so. And I believe I can hear the ad coming in the background, which I always get cut off by anyway. So this time I will let it take over the airwaves.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz and Tim Beckley. I think that now we ought to give our second guest a proper introduction. And with us is our very good friend, Peter Bernard. Now, Peter is the author of a new book of spooky campfire tales based on his Scary Stories New York City channel on YouTube. Well, now, back in the 90s, when Peter was developing animation ideas for television, Mothman Prophecies writer John Keel would force Peter to watch TV magic shows with him so that Keel could explain how the tricks were done and then badmouth the magicians. That sounds like John Keel, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, now a few years later, Peter was the first to put Amy Poehler on TV and helped her comedy troupe execute media pranks. And then when YouTube began, Peter got 1 million views and a mention on CNN for a UFO video that was actually a blimp. And this got Peter noticed by the friends of Andy Kaufman, and led to his interviewing fictional character Tony Clifton. Well, now I should also mention that Peter is the creator, keeper of the American Girls. What would that be?
Those American Girls, not the American. That's a tall line.
Those American Girls.
Those American. Yeah, don't get me sued, please.
I'm hyperventrifying.
And Peter is also responsible for the absolutely fantabulous videos that he puts together for the Exploring the Bizarre show that we put up on the Mr. UFO Files channel. And Peter, it's
UFO
great.
Secret files.
Files.
They're not just regular files; they're secret.
Secret files. Well, if they were that secret, then people couldn't find them.
Well, they could. People like to find things that are secret.
That's right. Well, Peter, great to have you with us tonight. It's just real pleasure. I mean, I know that a lot of people who watch your videos of our shows and then your scary story videos are really would love to hear you talk and to describe just how you manage to do the fantastic work that you do.
Wow, thank you. I don't think of it that way. I think of how it has to get done, and there's a deadline, and then it's done. So I don't know. It's fun to do. I end up spending more time on it than I'm supposed to, because I end up trying to put extra stuff in just to have fun, because I like to watch these things. The reason I started the Scary Stories, it's just a little Scary Stories. But first of all, I'm honored to be on with Seth Breedlove, because I'm just doing a little YouTube channel, and I don't really deserve to be on with Seth Breedlove, who is like doing very legitimate work, and I'm a big fan. But I started doing it because I was listening to a lot of Scary Stories channels when I was going to sleep at night, and I was thinking of what else can I do for money to support my cartoon band, because I have a band that's like the Archies mixed with the Monkees. I have these live action girls who play these cartoon characters, and I needed funding for it. So I was like, every night I was listening to Scary Stories. I was like, I should start writing scary stories. Like most of the channels, they pick up stories off Reddit and they just read them. I was like, I want to do this, but I want to write them. Like I want to write real stories. But originally the title was going to be Real Fake Tales. But then I figured I might actually want to have some stuff that's real. Sometimes, I might want to do something about John Keel, or I might want to do, whatever. Like we have a Nick Redfern interview on there now. And so I decided to just call it Scary Stories as a generic thing, and it features my fiction, and it also sometimes features real monster stuff, also, and sometimes it's mixed. Like sometimes,
in fact, what? I believe I narrated one of the.
Episodes. We started with a bunch of your stuff. Yeah, we had.
I don't even remember doing that. I must have been. Like, on an alcohol binge. It sounds like it.
It was a while back. Yeah, I'd love for you to do more, but I'd love for you to read from your own books. Yes. That's the cool stuff. The stuff that you've actually written, scary stories from various of your books. Because I've been reading your books obviously since before I knew you.
Well, we met at the Fortean Society meetings, actually right next to where I am here on the 30th Street.
Right. You're still right.
There was a building which has been demolished, and it's still a vacant lot. And if you climb the creaky stairs to the second floor, there was a rather dusty, dismal meeting room. And heaven forbid if anybody showed slides during the lecture, because you had all these poles interfering with the view to the floor. But that's common, and when you rent an inexpensive room to find the poles in the way. But there were some interesting lectures. Whitley Strieber was there. He gave a talk, and it was John kept it going for a couple of years, and then after the meetings, we would walk on over down the street to Miss K's, which is also and have a meatball sandwich. In fact, Peter, I don't know if you know it or not. Miss K's is no longer there.
I do know that. Yeah. In fact, before it disappeared, I went and had one final meatball sandwich there. Pictures of the place.
It was probably left over from one of the meetings.
Yeah, it kind of tasted like that. I took 3D pictures of the interior and the exterior for my own purposes, so I could, remember forever and look at it in 3D when I cross my eyes and stare at these pictures.
In fact, they've just started remodeling the place. I can't tell exactly what it's going to be. Somebody said a Korean restaurant. I don't think we need another one of those in the neighborhood. And then somebody else saying it's going to be a Korean deli, which we have plenty of. But I go for the Korean deli because then I don't have to walk too far. Miss K's was open 24 hours. You could get a sandwich delivered to your door. I don't know in a lot of towns if you can do that. Tim, can you get a sandwich delivered to your door at 2 a.m.?
No, definitely not. You're lucky if you could get a sandwich delivered to your door at just regular business hours.
Yeah. Hey, well, Peter, what was the first story that you decided to write and to do?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
How many have you done to date?
I don't know. I'm working on the second book. I'm hoping to have it out by Christmas. But I don't know. I read stuff like Stan Gordon kind of stuff, which is why I love the Chestnut Ridge film that Seth Breedlove did. I read stuff like that, and I try and write things like that. Like I try and put something weird in them. And the weird thing is that I didn't expect this to happen, but people will write to me and say, I know that story is true because you included this detail, but this is a detail that I plagiarized from someone else's story. And that makes them think it's real. And I don't understand. It's a very different world. It's funny because look, we were friends with John Keel, and I got to meet Antonio Huneeus and all these kinds of people there. But at the same time, I connected with Keel. Like, he was interested in my cartoons. At that point, I was developing stuff with like a Nickelodeon and Jumbo Pictures and stuff like that. And he was interested in that angle of knowing me. And so I would always want to talk about UFOs with him, and he would always turn it around, and he would say, you only want to talk about UFOs, but I was on the Johnny Carson show. And so I said to him, well, what did you talk about on the Johnny Carson show? He's like, well, that doesn't matter anyway, because he talked about UFOs, So like he wanted me to know that there was a lot more to him than just UFOs. And himself an artist, as well as a journalist. But so he had a great sense of humor, and that was kind of how I connected with you also.
I think people took his sense of humor the wrong way. I think he got his sense of humor from Charles Fort. Charles Fort was always being sort of hypocritical about what he wrote about. I mean, you never knew whether he was doing it tongue in cheek or, whether he was really trying to present it as a legitimate story. And of course, he did have the newspaper clippings to back up all this material. In fact, we were just talking the other day. Tim was on our last show about the Charles Fort collection at the New York Public Library.
Right.
Of course, I wanted to get my collection when I go on to higher realms. Put up somewhere where the public can go through all my files and pick out the reports and stuff like that. But as I understand it from our friend Schuyler, the Charles Fort collection, he wrote everything on 3x5 file cards in pencil.
Yeah.
So that I don't know how anybody could even sit there and try to make a reference to all of that. Now, I'm not sure whether the collection is still there, because they have moved a lot of things to some underground vault in New Jersey. I mean, you could imagine how many files and collection and the Dewey Decimal System really gets a workout there in the library.
Well, I just hope if they do move stuff like that, like you said, the underground vaults, they at least go and digitize them or microfiche them or something. I just hate for material like that just to disappear and nobody ever gets a chance to see it.
Yeah, well, a UFO and Bigfoot collections, they're kind of, I guess, treated with ill contempt by families associated with people that have been involved in the collection of these different accounts and things like that.
They get no respect. They get no respect, I tell you.
So, Peter, now you've got this book, which I actually wrote the introduction to. What are some of the stories that are in there?
Well, the title is, I think, Bigfoot attacked my tiny house, I think.
Now, what is a tiny house?
Tiny house, my roommate watches, or she used to watch these shows. It was trendy when I wrote it. There were a lot of TV shows about it. Tiny houses. People build these little tiny houses. And I've been told by a number of people that I overpriced, like the guy spent too much money on his tiny house, because I went into the details about it. And they just build these little tiny houses so that they can live cheaply and live free of different burdens. Like, some of them move around. They have like a trailer home kind of a thing.
Yeah,
and a lot of them,
you can put it on the back of your 4x5 or something.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
And you can go live different places, but some of them, buy property, and it's just that you have to buy less property, or you can have more land around, and it's just a tiny little house, and you have to, it's a trend. I don't know if it's going to last for. I mean, I imagine it'll last for 10 or 20 years since people are buying houses and moving in, so it'll have to last for a while.
And
so,
what does a tiny house cost?
Well, I had mine at like twice as much. I think you can do it for. Wait, let me ask my roommate. Hey, Marie, how much would a tiny house cost? I'm on the air. Can you please tell me? She's asking me details. She wants to know details. How much? About 30,000. Yeah, it depends if you want a toilet.
That's not exactly a tiny price. You can buy a trailer for that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's what you'd have to watch the show is some people who are into housey, homey kind of stuff are really into this because it can be a nice little home. What's going on?
Now,
oh yeah, there's like an entire like series on, I think, what is it, HGTV, based on people trying to buy or find the perfect tiny home.
Thank you. Yeah, that's where I got the idea from. She was watching these shows, and I was like, I need ideas for Bigfoot, and she was watching. Oh, I know, Bigfoot attacked my tiny home. So
didn't you have a Bigfoot rip up Donald Trump lawn sign?
Oh yeah. Bigfoot stole my Donald Trump lawn sign. Yeah, that one didn't go over well. YouTube blocked that from ads and stuff.
Really, you're
they
kidding?
It was offensive.
I mean, they have all this other junky stuff on there that's fake news, but you can't put a joke on.
Yeah, but I don't really know how it works. I'm a newer. We've only been around a year, and it seems like the newer you are, the more they scrutinize you. And so a lot of people who've been around for a while can have body parts being cut up and their lips off and stuff, and they can curse through the whole video, and I can't get away with anything. So
we do have our barely legal lesbian vampires movie up there on Mr. Creepo's site. The others have been taken. The others have been taken down. But that one is still there, and that has a nudity and all, and I mean nothing really offensive, but that one they still let up there, and the other ones I've had a terrible problem with the distribution on some of those, and just almost a Bigfoot type nightmare. Now you've also written and produced stuff on Dogman.
Yeah, Dogman seems to be really popular right now. In fact, the reason I put that Nick Redfern interview up, which is I did a while back with my cartoon characters, but I put the raw version up because he's talking about Dogman in there. I was listening to it and said, wow, he's talking about Dogman. Let me just put this up because everyone's so crazy about Dogman, and it's hard to find real Dogman stories. You know what I mean? So I make up a lot of them, but I try to find a kernel of truth in this. I try and find like other people's stories that I can work on, and sometimes people tell me stuff that supposedly happened to them, and I adapt it. So, but it's hard to find one that you're not just totally making up or basing on other stories that you've heard of. Whenever possible, because the people who love Dogman really want it to be real. They want to hear real stories, and there's only so much out there, but there's much more of an audience for real Dogman stories than there are actually real Dogman stories.
I know we've done a couple of shows here on Exploring the Bizarre, and they've had a tremendous amount of views and audio downloads, 7, 8 to 10,000. I mean, more than a lot of episodes have gotten. And I was kind of shocked by that in the beginning. Well, I'm not shocked by too much of anything, to be honest with you, but especially in the line of social media. But I was kind of shocked that the Dogman would be of such interest. I mean, it is kind of a fringe cryptoid creature. I mean, we have a lot of cryptoids that have been, seen over the years, but this seems to have kind of popped up out of. Well, of course, we had the Hound of the Baskervilles. The Hound of the Baskervilles. I mean,
your Hound of the Baskervilles book. But no, the Dogman has in Michigan. The Dogman started. What is this noise? I keep hearing these. My Skype is freaking out. I don't know if you're hearing it.
Nope, no. We can't hear it.
Oh, okay. I'm getting loud music through my. don't know what's going on. But anyway, I'll try and back. The Michigan Dogman dates back to the 80s, I think, and then in the 90s there was the Beast of Bray Road. So
yes,
it's been around for a while. I'm hearing music through my Skype. What is going on? I don't even know if you can hear me anymore.
It's Dogman.
Yeah, he's playing the flute or something like that.
Playing spooky music. could be other tabs. Could be other tabs open on your phone.
You just have to explain Skype to me again. Can you guys hear me now?
Oh yeah, we
can hear you. Yeah,
we could hear you all
through that. Because I was hearing loud music playing. There's some kind of easy listening elevator music was blasting in my ears. So, So Dogman isn't a new thing, but it's more and more popular every year.
Well, people are calling it Dogman, but 10 years ago or so, people would have been saying, "Oh, it was a werewolf."
The Beast of Bray Road, Michigan Dogman is a term that goes back to the 80s when that radio DJ in Michigan did a song called "The Legend," I think. So
that was based on that that viral video that supposedly showed.
Well, no, the Gable film came years later. Was actually
did that come later? Okay.
Yeah. I forget what year, but the Gable film came later. It was made to look like it was shot in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Tim, you did a chapter for one of our books on the legends of a cryptoid type creature that was similar to a Dogman.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there's as Peter has pointed out, I mean, there's been a history of Dogman, Wolfman, what have you. I mean, for centuries. Down here where I live in southern Indiana, the town of Vincennes, which was settled by the French, back in the early 1600s, before this was even part of the United States, this area, and they brought with them their legends of the loup-garou. And those stories persist today. Their people still see, what they claim or werewolf, or, as Peter pointed out, now they would call them Dogman. But, and don't forget, the loup-garou can be any kind of animal. There's even stories of like a werecow. So.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I don't know about that. When are you starting writing cow stories?
Yep.
What does a bear cow look like? It's a walking cow? Really?
It's a man that has turned into a cow, and usually because it's based on Catholic tradition as well. If these people don't go to church for a certain amount of time, they become cursed and can turn into like a cursed animal of some kind. Usually it's like a canid of some kind, but it can be practically any kind of creature.
Wow.
So shapeshifters.
Shapeshifters.
Yeah. Exactly.
The loup-garou, also people call it the rougarou, which is just a bastardization of loup-garou. But if you look up ROUGAROU, there are videos on YouTube about that also. It's like down in New Orleans in that area because it comes from the French.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's again that's like around Vincennes. There's that very heavily heavy French tradition when it comes to that. I find the Dogman stories really interesting. I've often wondered, and Peter, I know that I think you've talked about this. Have there been situations where people have seen, what they would describe then as a Bigfoot, but they'll say that it has, it looked more canid than a Bigfoot, though even they would call it a Bigfoot. Yeah.
Right, that's true. A lot of times if I'm listening to shows and people are talking about their Bigfoot encounters, they'll talk about it having dog ears, but they're thinking it's a Bigfoot. They're very similar, except that usually if people notice the legs of the Dogman, they usually look more like dog legs or, horse legs or deer legs in the back where they're bent backwards. Or, also Goatman is another one where they have the backward bent legs, except those end in hooves. And the wolf creatures and dog creatures, they end in more like large dog feet. But there's the Dogman is usually actually a shaggy kind of thing, and there's all these different names, and people talk about the different things. But there are ones that look like wolves with the pointy ears, and there are other ones that look more like shaggy dogs with the hair hanging in their eyes, which I find it hard to imagine that being scary. But I guess if it's tall enough and it's got big enough teeth and it's growling at you, I guess I would run also. But it sounds kind of funny. It looks like the shaggy DA. That's what I always picture when I hear these stories, and I kind of chuckle. But I know I wouldn't chuckle if I were there and I saw it.
No. Well, and
Peter, do you think that they're physical creatures, or could they be paranormal?
Well, I just am only interested from this point of view of stories, because I stay as far away from the farce as I can. Like, I live in New York City, and that's kind of why I like monsters like Bigfoot and Dogman, because you're not going to see them in Manhattan, so I can talk about them and I can kind of feel safe and distant from it.
Staten Island is the closest one that I know of, I believe. We're walking across a golf course.
Really?
Yeah, back many years ago, yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, actually, that's not far from New Jersey. You're right. It could have swum there, actually.
Yeah. Well, what did they swim across, right?
Unless they are like werewolves and they're just humans who work at the golf course and then change into wolves sometimes. Like, I don't know. Because there are American Indian, the shapeshifter myths in the American Indian. There's some interesting stories there. Like, I can't remember where I heard it from, but it's somebody. They were talking about.
Hold on to that thought, Peter, because we are having to go to our top of the hour break here. So when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Seth Breedlove and Peter Bernard on exploring the bizarre. So stay tuned for more.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
We have with us tonight Peter Bernard and Seth Breedlove. And Seth, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your new film that's going to be coming out on October 20th. Is that correct? The Invasion on Chestnut Ridge?
Yeah, that hits next Friday night, or Friday, I guess Thursday night, around midnight it'll be up.
Well, and so what's this movie about? I see that you feature like Stan Gordon and the whole Pennsylvania, especially Western Pennsylvania, UFOs and monsters. I probably just described it right there, didn't I?
you kind of did, because it's kind of like a buffet of weirdness. It starts with the Kecksburg UFO crash and moves on to the Uniontown, Fayette County UFO Bigfoot wave of the 1970s, and it moves into Dogman stories and orbs, and it's kind of it kind of takes you through this litany of really bizarre activity that's taken place along the Chestnut Ridge for over a century. And the Chestnut Ridge is this 72-mile mountain range in southwestern PA. And it's different from our movies in the fact that instead of focusing on one specific monster case, it kind of focuses on the ridge itself. And I think stylistically, it's heavily influenced by like 1970s and 80s television docs like Unsolved Mysteries and In Search Of. So it kind of draws from this well of really cool, things that I think we all, if you're into this stuff, you probably love.
So now, what made you decide to tackle this? Because I mean, as Tim Beckley and I well known, I mean there is just so much stuff going on in that area. I think it would just be impossible to try to pick out a few stories out of so many. It's just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do all this? So I mean, what made you decide to tackle this?
Honestly, more than anything, it was the fact that I wanted to work with my buddy Mark Matsky, who actually wrote the movie and did the narration. And Mark and I have been friends for a while, and Mark has worked with us on a couple of the other movies, but we never got to do anything collaboratively. So he is a huge Stan Gordon acolyte and a big Stan Gordon fan, and he's more aware of his work than probably anyone I know. I mean, he's got like a trivia like knowledge of all that stuff. So I wanted to work with him on this and kind of let him go crazy with the writing of it. As far as like how we got to the point where the film became what it is today, it started life as basically a Kecksburg movie. Originally, It was just going to be a Kecksburg UFO crash movie. And I think originally our plan was to make it a little 40-minute short. And the reason was we had already done The Mothman of Point Pleasant, which we just released in June. And the idea of trying to put out a second movie that was over an hour or anything like that seemed absurd to us. But once we got into actually scheduling out our interviews for this movie, what became the game plan kind of started to take shape. And instead of focusing on just Kecksburg, we used Kecksburg as kind of the inciting incident for all the weirdness along the ridge. And one of our subjects actually even says that the Kecksburg incident, more than anything, seems like the catalyst for people that live in that area who have had weird experiences to start talking about them. So, but we, through researching the movie, we did find out that there's been strange, unexplained things happening along that area for decades. But more than anything, it was wanting to work with Mark, and to do something this big and sprawling was really kind of exciting for me, because the challenge became, how are we going to tell this story in a way that makes any sense to a viewer? Because none of these stories are necessarily connected to the next, other than through where they took place.
Well, I particularly enjoyed some of the animation that you used in that film, especially when you were recounting the event of the Bigfoot type creatures walking along the fence line. The animation that you used on that was very nice, just very well done.
Yeah. Chris Scalf does the animated sequences in our movies, and he did 3 or 4 of them in Mothman, and he did a number of them in this, and he'll be on every project we do in 2018 as well. So Flatwoods and our Champ movie, and then our Bray Road movie. He's doing animated sequences for all of those. We've been extremely blessed with like super talented artists and illustrators wanting to be involved in the movies. So Chris is just the latest addition to the team, and a really important one. He did a great job on that sequence. I'm also a really big fan of the Dogman sequence he did, which is actually kind of cool. That Dogman sequence was originally created and animated years ago, I guess, and he actually just reworked it for use in our movie. And I think it still comes across really cool, and I really enjoyed the way he did that, and I really like the way he animated the Thunderbird sequence to where it almost takes on this found footage kind of look. But yeah, he added a ton to the proceedings.
Of course, one of my favorite all-time favorite movies, kind of in this genre, would be The Legend of Boggy Creek. Mm-hmm. I mean, I even have it on DVD, and I passed out dozens of copies to friends and all to turn them on to it. How did you first hear about Boggy Creek? I mean, you saw the movie, obviously.
Actually, I didn't. I saw the movie after Lyle Blackburn had approached us about working on Boggy Creek Monster. I up until then, I hadn't really been familiar with the original movie, but I did once I discovered it, I discovered that I really actually had a love for that movie, and it's grown over the 2 years that I've now been familiar with it, and I actually really respect that movie a lot. Actually, I think a lot of the cinematography and stuff in it is actually really incredible and even kind of ahead of its time in a lot of ways. I mean, in a way, it kind of invented the found footage, genre. I don't know if we would have what we have today in found footage if not for The Legend of Boggy Creek.
Well, it just goes to show you, though, the original director of Boggy Creek, whose name slips me at the moment. I mean, working on an extremely limited budget, and so I mean, he had to just kind of work on the fly. So you can have a multi-million-dollar budget and come up with a crap movie. But sometimes I think that when you're working on a limited budget, that that really gets your creative juices flowing, and I have a lot of respect and enjoy a lot more movies. I think that concentrate more on the plot than on special effects, CGI, and all that.
Yeah, and he was creating film at a time where they were actually being made on film. So I think, his daughter told me something like 70% of the budget of that movie went toward buying film, buying film reels, because it was a totally different ballgame. We made our Boggy Creek Monster movie for under $8,000, and that includes travel expenses, paying the poster artist, everything. So back then, when you're saying you're spending $100,000, most of that's because of the fact that they had to film on film. I can buy a $40 SD card and shoot 1080 video or 4K video, and it cost me $40 to do it. So.
Yeah, well, a lot of those old films were shot on what were called ends. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but you say you would have a larger company shoot a movie, and they wouldn't finish the entire roll of film, and so there would be leftover film that they would cut off and then resell.
Recans. Recans.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, in
yes.
fact, that's how the Roswell autopsy film got going. Somebody had recans from 1947, and so they put whatever footage that they had on the night, and people fell for that. I mean, there's people don't know about filmmaking, and it's recans. Like
many of the inexpensive films, especially in the 50s and 60s, were shot that way. We did some stuff too. Yeah, you may have 100, 200 feet of film left in these cans that they would use.
Cool.
Yeah, like you said, big difference than just getting SDS card.
Yeah, but I think those guys, the filmmakers, well, even guys like yourself, there had to be probably much more of a focus on quality with each shot, because you're much more aware of the fact that if you screw this up, you're wasting money. So I think now
the best you could do is 2 for 1. Shoot it twice, perhaps.
If you're lucky, yeah. And we were talking earlier about the animation for your films. The Mothman of Point Pleasant. I just want to point out that I also liked, and I guess it was the same guy who did the animation for your new film. The scenes where the guys were in the old powerhouse with Mothman. I mean, the animation was just fantastic. It looked almost like an oil painting come to life.
That's his style on Mothman, was actually that. And if you see what he does, he actually creates a painting and then he takes that into After Effects and animates it. So it starts life as a still painting. And I think with Mothman at Point Pleasant, he was very consciously trying to create that oil painting look. And then he changed it up a little bit for Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. And I can tell you for Flatwoods, he's changing it up even more. I think we're going with a black and white kind of look on Flatwoods, so that is going to play into the fact that stylistically our Flatwoods movies very heavily influenced by Forbidden Planet and Day the Earth Stood Still, and this early 1950s kind of Cold War era sci-fi So he's kind of trying to capture that a little bit in his animation on that film. But all the artists do that kind of stuff. Like Matt Harris, who's been involved with us since our Minerva Monster movie. In fact, he's one of the only remaining original members of the crew that have been there since Minerva Monster. He always approaches each project in a different stylistic way as well. So, but we've, like I said, like those guys, the animator, the guys that create the illustrations and stuff, they tie the entire project together. It really takes on a completely different life when they start sending their work in.
Yeah, it really does. So now, on any of these films that you have worked on, I mean, have you ever encountered or had anything unusual happen while you were filming? I mean, naturally, and I've seen, I think, practically all of them now. You would have included it if you were able to get it on film. But when you were out doing interviews or getting B-roll or things like that, I mean, anything unusual happened to you?
Honestly, I wish I had a crazy story, and I really don't. About the weirdest thing that's happened to us actually happened to us in the TNT area. Probably it was late May of this year, and we were not there filming one of our movies. We were actually there shooting a Japanese TV show, in which, for whatever reason, they decided I would make a good Mothman expert. So I was their Mothman expert on this Japanese television
I was
show.
thought you were going to say you'd make a good Mothman.
They probably would have asked if they thought I would go for it. But we were back in the TNT area, and in an area that there really aren't many people. It's actually one of the sections that's owned by the Farm Museum that's really near there. So you're down by the aqueducts rather than over by the bunkers. But we were back on this abandoned trail up on this hill, and something on two hills on both sides of us started throwing rocks at us. And so we Brandon and I, who was also with me, we got real excited because we started thinking, well, this is really weird to be happening, while you're in the TNT area and you're out looking for Mothman, and all of a sudden you have what you consider like a Bigfoot type activity start happening. So we got really amped up about it, and the Japanese film crew, meanwhile, was absolutely irate that Brandon and I are like on our knees on the ground trying to find the rocks that were coming off the hill, and they're just trying to get back down to the base camp so we can find their fake Mothman, who was actually just one of the crew members, the Japanese crew members, hiding in the bushes. But we ended up. They left us. They walked off and left us there. And after they left us, I killed my head. I was wearing a headlamp. I killed my headlamp. And as soon as I did, there was this kind of muttering, this really weird kind of talking or something that happened in the middle of the trail, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from us. And I flipped my light back on because it freaked me out so bad. As soon as the light came back on, it stopped. And then Brandon came over, and as soon as he walked over, he turned off his headlamp, and I turned mine off, and we heard it start up again. So it was really weird. I can't say what it was. It could definitely be people, because it's West Virginia, and there's people in those woods. Probably more so than Bigfoots. So, but that's about the weirdest thing I've had happen to me.
Well, I mean, I've been back in that area, and I mean, probably in some of those areas that you were, that aren't really, they're pretty much off the beaten trail, and even to this day, there's just I don't know, an air of weirdness about that place. I don't know.
Yeah, there really is. And we went to some places I'd never been before, including this kind of abandoned water silo. There were a couple places that I'd never been to there when we were there, and in one of them we actually had to crawl down through this, really, like, it was completely overgrown, but one of the guys that was with us knew about it because apparently he used to, as a kid, go back down there and hang out and probably mess around, smoke pot or whatever. But like he actually cut a little trail through the underbrush for us to get down to this abandoned building. And once you were inside, I was convinced at any minute we were going to be, visited by the Mothman or something, just because there's something, like you said, there's an air of weirdness about that whole place.
Yeah, it just never goes away. Well, and your film, The Mothman, of Point Pleasant. I appreciate that you included the other high strangeness cases that were going on at the same time, because I've seen other documentaries and short films or whatever, and they mostly just concentrate on the Mothman, but there was so much more going on at the time. The Men in Black, UFOs,
and not to forget Woody Derenberger's UFO.
Yes, yeah, the
contact.
great.
In fact,
yeah.
I knew Woody. He came to New York and gave a lecture for a group back in the, I guess it was the mid the 70s, and he had just written this a little book called Visitors from Lanulos, and of course Lanulos was known as the nudist planet. I mean, everybody walked around there sky. What's the word? Skyclad.
Skyclad. There you go.
Skyclad. Yeah, that's the genial way of putting it. So he was a character. There was some wife swapping going on and some other events, but there were other people that lived down there in and around Point Pleasant. I can't remember the exact town that he lived in, but that were having these experiences.
He was like right up in Mineral Wells, which is about maybe 45 minutes from Point Pleasant.
Mm-hmm. And I always wondered, what propels somebody to, if it's a made-up story, to make something like that up.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually just interviewed his daughter about their experiences as a family for Small Town Monsters case files. And she is, still convinced to this day that her dad didn't make it up. And she's also claimed that, she had dinner with Indrid Cold and all this kind of stuff. So you honestly probably know obviously so much more about this stuff than I do. Like earlier in the show when you guys were just talking about John Keel, like that kind of stuff I adore, because I never got to meet Keel, and I'm coming into this after the fact, but to hear you guys actually talk about Keel as a man, to me, is really exciting, because I didn't know him.
Yeah, we even went to see Killer Clowns from Outer Space together. That became one of our favorite movies. It lasted for 3 days on Times Square, and then it disappeared. Although, of course, it's played, in midnight movies, and it streams on Netflix or one of these channels, and it's quite a film if you haven't seen it. The UFO is in the shape of a circus tent, and the aliens are clowns, and their ray guns shoot out cotton candy.
Well, I remember Woody's wife talking about meeting Indrid Cole and the others, and she said that they scared her, that she thought that they were up to no good, and because they looked so human, that they were basically infiltrating mankind or something. But I know that after he died, I think, wasn't it, Tim, that she came forward and said that she didn't know what was going on, but she knew that there something was happening, something real was going on.
And there were other people, kind of as reminiscent of the Howard Menger experiences. There were other people there too who saw ships landing behind their house, and all sorts of weird phenomena that cannot easily be explained.
But that's just it. I mean, there was just all kinds of unusual phenomena taking place in that area, at that time. I mean, as Seth pointed out in his film, people had been seeing like a Birdman for years before 1967. But I think that there was a major flap of UFOs that took place at around the same time as the Birdman, which was really unusual. And I hear the music playing, Tim, so that means that we're going to have to go to our bottom of the hour break already. Here we are at the bottom of the hour. All right, well, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Peter Bernard and Seth Breedlove on Exploring the Bizarre, so stay tuned for more.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And some of the most electrifying guests.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, our guests are what make the show. We just sit back here humbly and ask a few questions. Peter, Thunderbirds. Giant
hard
birds.
To animate. Yeah, I don't know that much about thunderbirds. I'm fascinated with pterodactyls, and when people say pterodactyls are still around, I would love for them to be. And but yeah, birds are hard to animate, so I usually don't write stories about them. You can. I did a Mothman thing, which was actually was real stuff from Lon Strickler's blog, and that. I was easy to animate because they glide, so I could just hold it still and move it through in the 3D space and put it over pictures of Chicago, because there's the Mothman over Chicago. A lot of people are seeing this man-bat thing in Chicago, and I find it fascinating. But and a lot of the sightings, a number of the sightings, are right around Second City, the comedy theater there. And I used to help. Amy Poehler and her friends, they're from there. They're from Chicago. And they came to New York, and they were pulling media pranks. And also I had a local TV show, so they would give me films to run to help them with these pranks. And we were supposed to present them and say they're real. Because they were also influenced by Andy Kaufman. That was my connection with them. We all loved Andy Kaufman kind of pranks. But they did this one thing where they started writing the local newspaper, the New York Press, which doesn't exist anymore, and they had a letter section that everyone read for some reason. It was very popular. And so they started writing saying that there was a sport that was real called Thunderball, where it was like baseball, except that after you hit the ball, you can carry the bat with you and try and hit the fielders if they try and tag you out and stuff like that. And so they started writing letters to the New York Press saying, this is the American sport, it's the great sport. And then other people would write in saying, no, it's un-American, it's violent, and it should be banned. But the whole thing was so then they asked us to write in, and then they asked their audience. They would ask their audience at every show to write into New York Press and take a side on the Thunderball issue, I think it was called. So when I noticed that a lot of the Mothman sightings in Chicago are around Second City, I started to think, this could be something like that. It could be an organized prank with one central source. And I suggested to Lon Strickler, no, actually I didn't. I suggested to friends, and they suggested to Lon Strickler on Twitter that if somebody really wanted to investigate this, they should look at everyone's Facebook that reports stuff, see if they've been to a comedy show recently, see if they're improv students or look into that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of different kinds of people who pull different kinds of pranks, and a lot of it's just because of the thrill of influencing the local culture, So my main interest in all this kind of stuff is the cultural aspect, because I'm an artist. I'm not a scientist, and I don't pretend to be a scientist. That's kind of why I like Keel. He thought of himself as an artist and a journalist. He didn't say, oh, I'm a cryptozoologist, I'm a scientist, you have to take me seriously. He was the first to make jokes about himself and make jokes about the situation. So, but a lot of times when I bring that up to people, they take it the wrong way, and they take it like, oh, you don't believe in it, you're a cynic, you're a whatever. Like, no, I don't believe or disbelieve. One of the things that Keel always told me was that it's very important to remain agnostic when you're dealing with all this stuff, because if you start to believe anything in this area, the weird area, then you're going to go crazy, because that's what happens to the contactees and so forth.
Yeah, but he had enough weird experiences that would make a person, mind whirl. I mean, he even had He even had people going underneath his kitchen cabinet, like an interdimensional. I mean, come on, he had a lot of things, and of course the telephone calls that he received in
Telephone
the
calls,
hotel.
yeah.
Yeah, in
And
Point Pleasant.
the guy who does johnkeel.com kind of solved that mystery, though. It seems that he did. He found circumstantial evidence that suggests strongly that it was this family from Connecticut that was actually spying on him, not the government or whatever. There were these people who were convinced that people involved in UFOs were like Russians or something like that. So they were paranoid, and so they were spying on Keel to find out if he was a Russian spy and just trying to, mess with Americans' minds, or if there was some kind of nefarious reason he was writing these things. So that seems to be what that was about. You can check johnkeel.com about that. Like, that guy does a great job.
Hey, so Seth, what about Indrid Cold?
What about him?
Yeah, well, I mean, did you do any? Did you do any research on the telephone calls, or what? Or him being a legitimate person or a real person, or?
I really haven't done any in-depth like investigating into this stuff, and I haven't been able to do that kind of thing since our first movie, simply because of the amount of time we spend, working on the movie and then moving on to the next movie. So I would love to do something like that. You got
to do a director's cut.
Right. And well, that's kind of what Case Files is going to be. Case Files is this like free web series we're putting up on YouTube, where I'm going to try to find the time somehow to interview additional people and then add in some cutscenes and stuff from our movies to kind of expand the backstory of some aspects of the film that some people might feel, didn't get enough time on screen. So that would definitely include, the Indrid Cold and the things like, the UFO aspect of the Whitehall Bigfoot case and, just different things like that. So I did, that's why I went and interviewed Tanya Derenberger. I found out she lived fairly close to me. So I went and, I took the opportunity to talk to her about Indrid and that, the way that influenced her life. Her take on Indrid is very different from anything else that I've heard, and I don't know how to take that exactly, but she, to her, he was just basically like her dad's friend, her dad's exotic friend, and she claimed that him and his wife and kids came to her house and had dinner with them one night and stuff like that. So it's almost like one of those situations where the more you learn about it, the more bizarre it becomes and the more questions it leaves you with.
Well, I guess that in that area, people who grew up during that time, Indrid Cold kind of became almost like the boogeyman of the region, and people still talk about him. I mean, which is to me kind of odd, because he seems almost to be like, it's kind of like a fringe aspect of everything that went on there. But I mean, there are people who talk about him like he's still living next door almost.
Yeah, so something she said that's very interesting is that Indrid was seen by other motorists that night along the road, which is something I'd wondered about for a while. And she was telling me she had actually dug into some archives she said there's a UFO archive in Switzerland, I believe. And she had contacted them, and maybe you guys can speak to the truth behind that, but she spoke to them, and they were able to verify that there were reports of other motorists who had seen Woody pulled over on the side of that road, talking to someone who was standing on the side of the road talking to him through the car. There's no reports of a UFO, but they did see him pulled over talking to a man, which I thought was intriguing because 77's a busy highway. In fact, I went to the exact spot where his sighting would have occurred, or at least within, a relatively close proximity to where it would have occurred. Now, obviously things would have been a little different in 1966, but still there would have been other motorists on a major highway like that. So I was always curious if other people had said anything about seeing him. The other thing I thought was intriguing about that is the report that we included in the movie that Keel had actually mentioned where there was a car that was headed southbound. Woody was headed southbound. The other car was headed northbound about an hour after Woody's sighting, and they said that they saw a ship land in the road in front of their car and two men in overalls or coveralls get out of it. And that would have been going in the opposite direction of Woody's. I might be mixing up two stories. They might have actually, I think what they actually said they saw was the grinning man is how they referred to him, not the coveralls. I know who I'm getting that mixed up, but I thought that was an intriguing sighting because it seems to verify that something was going on right in that vicinity that night. Whatever it was, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Now, how time-wise, what was the timeline between that and the Point Pleasant sightings?
Well, the Point Pleasant sightings kicked up right around like a week later or a couple days later, because it also ties into the sighting of the weird lights on the farm. And now I'm blanking on the witness's name, but the man, the farmer who owned the dog, the bandit that ran off after. Oh,
yes.
The red lights and never came back. That all took place days prior to the Scarberry mallet sighting. Of course, the Scarberry mallet sighting isn't the actual first sighting of the Mothman. It seems like the first sighting of the Mothman would have been at the Clendenin graveyard when the grave diggers saw the monster or saw the Mothman. What's intriguing about that is Clendenin's actually extremely close to Flatwoods. It's right down the road from Flatwoods. So it's actually closer to Flatwoods than it would be to Point Pleasant. But they said they saw, something that seems to have resembled the Mothman fly over while they were digging that grave. And then there was a sighting at the National Guard Armory, which is right by the TNT factory area. So there was a sighting there prior to the Scarberry Mallets encounter as well. So there were a couple, possible Mothman sightings prior to the Scarberry Mallets. It just seems like the Scarberry Mallets is what really kicked everything off. But what confuses me, and maybe you guys might have an answer here, but what confuses me about the Scarberry Mallets encounter is that there was a fifth person that was with them that night who is left out of typical reports of the way that evening went down, and including in our film we didn't include it because I wasn't able to verify anything, but supposedly there was a fifth occupant of the car, and in fact Lauren Coleman pointed out to me he's in the photo, the famous photo of the Scarberries and the Mallets standing together. He's standing right behind them, kind of in frame, but in shadow enough that you never notice him unless someone point him out to you. And I believe he was one of their cousins, but supposedly he was in the car with them that night.
Well, I have heard, and they may have told you this, or the people who were involved with this, that they were actually out looking to harass other teenagers at the Lovers Lanes there in the TNT area. So that's it always kind of surprised me that after their encounter they went to the police because they had already been out. Yeah. I guess shining lights on other cars.
No, well, supposedly the story goes that they were out there on Lovers Lane, hanging out and.
Yeah, well, I would heard that they were out because you're talking about they were already married, and they were out having their fun by harassing anybody else trying to have fun.
So, Seth, have you investigated any of the Thunderbirds?
No, other than the report that we have in our film, of the Thunderbird sighting up on the Chestnut Ridge. We haven't done much with the Thunderbird stories. There's the accounts of the Birdman, which almost has Thunderbird-like characteristics that's talked about in our movie. That's about as in the Mothman movie. That's about as close as we've gotten. So I talked to Ken Gerhard at length about that stuff because he's a big, Thunderbird researcher. But I haven't delved into it much for myself.
Oh, you really should. That would be a good movie for you to do because I'm thinking about like the Illinois and there were some in Indiana sightings that took place. There's a whole like a flap of Thunderbird sightings in the 70s.
Also, too, there's an etching or a painting on the side of the. I think it's at the Mississippi River that was supposedly made by Native Americans. I believe it's been retouched over the years, but
it's collapsed. Now they have, I guess it's like a metal mural that hangs over the sides.
Piazza Spurred, I think it's called.
Yes, yeah. Very, very spectacular looking. So, and yeah, there's a whole Native American, traditional Thunderbird in that area as well. So, very unusual. So, when do you expect your Flatwoods Monster film to be finished and then released?
It'll be released right around April 6th, which that's I think this is the first time I've actually said the release date anywhere. But yeah, I think April 6th is the planned release date. It's going to be a short film. It's probably going to be around 40 to 45 minutes. And yeah, early April is the plan there. And then in June, we're putting out a Champ mini series, which is about the Lake Champlain monster.
Hey.
And then we are doing a Bray Road documentary next October. So, and we fund all of our films through Kickstarter. So that'll probably launch right around January 26th.
What would you say is your most popular or profitable movie?
Mothman.
Mothman?
Yeah.
People have heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mothman movie actually was fairly mainstream for our movies, and compared to our others, the amount of people that have viewed it is fairly obscene. It's the movie that kind of netted us a distribution deal and all that kind of stuff. So we're still very independent, but we did manage to sign with a distributor who hasn't bothered to release our movies. But whatever.
I have the same problem with mine.
Yeah, I was say we know that situation.
Yeah, I actually told my sales agent today that I don't know how I feel about distributors at this point.
Oh, they're honest, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Honest, yeah, that's definitely that is a word that exists.
Hey, so Peter, what do you got rolling along here in the near future?
Well, actually, I started putting up. I haven't done our audio blog for a while, our audio podcast of the scary stories. But starting today, we have a new story every day for the rest of October until Halloween. So that's one thing that's going on.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
Well, no, I have a backlog because I haven't put them up for a while. So I've been collecting them. Yeah. And I wanted to do this for October. So so that's what we're doing.
And each one runs how many minutes?
Well, the one that's up now is only like 5 minutes, but some of them are longer. It's going to be different every day. Just whatever the stories are. Yeah. Some of them are 5, some of them are 20 minutes. In that range. The YouTube
I think people's attention spans are shorter than they ever were before.
Yeah, but on YouTube, the longer ones seem to do better. Our 2-hour video is the one that's gotten the most views this month. So. Our best of. So I collect them like once a month or so, once every month or two into a longer one. And that usually, it's a rerun, and I try and put one new story in there, and that usually gets more views than all of them. Some people just wait for the long ones,
In the publishing business, we call that a pickup. when you would run the material that had been, culled from previous issues. Oh.
Yeah, well, it's people who like scary stories want to listen to it on their job if they have a job where like a security guard.
If they have a job.
Yeah, or they want to listen to exactly. Or if they don't have a job, then it gives them something to do to distract them from the fact
while they look for one. Yes.
Yeah, or don't. Yeah. So that's basically what's up with us. And I'm working on a Christmas album for my cartoon band, which is nothing scary about it at all.
Can you tell what the average age of your audience is for the spooky stories?
On YouTube, they have stats and demographics, but the thing is, everyone who's young on YouTube lies about their age, so it's hard to tell the ages. I can tell the genders, and it's mostly male. It's like 67% male some months and up to 75% male. But the ages are supposedly, the prime demographic of 21 to like 55-ish. But I imagine that a lot of them are actually kids who just, say that they're an adult so they can. Because if you say you're a kid on YouTube, there's a lot of videos that get blocked from you. So a lot of kids
for scary stories.
I don't know if mine would be blocked, but some ad blocked ones probably would be the ones that YouTube says are too shocking. But everything I do is PG. It's all safe for kids. I think it's all stuff. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say you can tell sometimes the age of the viewers by the comments that they leave behind.
Oh, geez, yeah. In that case, the age of 5 would be about the average. Yes. Some people are really crude about their comments. Here they're getting it for free. It's not like they're paying for it, and they're so,
obnoxious.
Obnoxious, that's the word, yeah. And Seth, what do you got down? How do people get in touch with you, Peter?
PeterBernard.com or the youtube.com/Scary Stories NYC or PeterBernard.com/Scary Stories.
So
you can find numbers and everything there.
You guarantee a thrill a minute.
If you say so.
And Seth, how do people get to your space and time?
Smalltownmonsters.com is the best way to do it, and then shop.smalltownmonsters.com is where you can get DVDs, and then all our movies are available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Well, we wish you both continued success with your research and your film making and your storytelling there, Peter. And Tim, you have any last-minute comments here before we close out the evening?
Oh, well, I just encourage our listeners to look up both of these gentlemen online. Seth's films are just I've enjoyed every single one of them, and Peter's stuff. I love his stuff. I love his animations and his stories. On Scary Stories on YouTube. They're just I just can't say enough.
And Exploring the Bizarre on YouTube.
Oh my gosh!
If you
Peter does such a fantastic job with our shows.
Man. Yeah, we're worth just watching the first 5 or 10 minutes for a chuckle episode.
But everyone should check out Tim's book. What is it? The Matrix of Philip.
The Matrix of Philip K. Dick and the Synchronicities of Tim Beckley. Yeah, that's
a great book.
Yeah,
because of that book, I got to meet Jacques Vallée at the film festival, and which thank you, Tim, for that.
Yeah, that's doing quite well. And we've also published just recently Reverend Barry Downing's a book on flying saucers in the Bible. This is the first book he wrote a book. 1968, I think it was. It's over 50 years ago. Came out the same year as Chariots of the God by Eric Van Daniken, and it, I'm not much on Christian ministers, but this one, Barry Downing believes that there were physical angels, and the Red Sea really parted. It's not a fantasy book per se, and he's done a great job of researching the topic, and it's if you're interested in that at all, it's certainly a must read.
All right, so we have to say goodnight, Tim.
We do.
All right.
I guess so. All right. Good night, everybody. Good night, Tina. Good night, Peter. Good night, Seth.
Good night, John.
Good night, Madeline Star and PQ River.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on exploring the bizarre, and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the bizarre.